There are three certainties in life: death, taxes, and the Pittsburgh Penguins beating the Columbus Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Gamp. You can follow him on Twitter at Senator for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And to kick things off for today's episode, the Penguins get a much-needed 5-3 victory over the Columbus Blue Jackets on Tuesday night. And I really like how they came out in the first period. They dominated the Jackets from start to finish in that first period. They take a 2-0 lead into the first intermission. But after that period is where the Penguins play really dipped. And I'm kind of at the point where I think the Penguins are pretty fortunate that they came out with the result in this game. I thought the final 40 minutes, they did not play well at all. They were outshot 18-6 in the second period. Tristan Jarry had to come up with a number of 10 bell saves in that period and the third period as well. They looked like the team that played the night before, not the Columbus Blue Jackets. So that's a little concerning to me as we head into the final 22 games of the season. You can't take 40 minutes off against most teams in the league and expect to come out with a win. You can obviously do it at least once or maybe twice against a team like the Blue Jackets, who are one of the worst teams in the league. But against teams that are close to you in the standings or especially above you in the standings, you can't play like that and usually come out on the right side of the result. The Penguins, I feel like, were pretty fortunate to get the result after playing a really good first period, but a very bad next 40 minutes.
I had pretty much one main takeaway from that game last night, and it's that the Pittsburgh Penguins are not a very good hockey team. The Columbus Blue Jackets are a bad hockey team. That was just it. Last night's game overall. I mean, Penguins get the win. That's nice to see. We've talked about it on the show that, this is kind of all exhibition at this point, with the team being in a position to sell, likely not going to make the playoffs. So now we're looking forward to next year and what the next season can look like, who's still got value, who doesn't, and so on. But that was a very sloppy hockey game. I don't want to say it was difficult to watch, because I'm a gigantic hockey nerd and a hockey fan, so I'm going to lap up any and all hockey content. But at the same time, I mean, the first 20 minutes, even with the Penguins playing pretty well, it was still a sloppy game. There was not a ton of chances, not a lot of pressure either way. You could tell that this was against two teams that know that their season comes to an end after game 82 and that the focus is on next season. Now, I will say I was pretty pleased by some of the people that we've been talking about that could be getting moved here in the next few days. I thought Reilly Smith had a very strong game. I thought Lars Eller looked okay and not out of place on the top line. That's a showcase for somebody who's likely going to get moved. And overall, I mean, you're right. The Penguins were very lucky to come out with two clean points in this one, because they didn't show up in the second period. They got their butts kicked by the Blue Jackets for 20 minutes. And then in the third period, I think it was played a little bit more even, but I would tilt it a little bit more towards Columbus. So overall, the Penguins get lucky to come out with 2 points. I like Gino's game. It was nice to see Jesse Puljujarvi finally get on the score sheet. So overall, I mean, you're happy with the 2 points, but we all know what we're looking forward to at this point.
Agreed. And just to dive into some of those individual performances that you hinted at, I agree. I thought Reilly Smith played one of his finest games as a member of the Penguins this season. That touch pass to Evgeni Malkin before he ripped that slap shot past Greaves was a really nice pass by Smith. And then you saw Malkin feed Smith for a one-timer later on in that game, and he just blasted that thing into the net. We got to see that connection come back for the first time in quite a few months. That looked like some October to November type connection from Evgeni Malkin and Reilly Smith. And we haven't seen that type of the connection with them over the last 4 months. So it was nice seeing that come back, at least for this game, even though it's probably too little too late for this team to get in the playoffs. But still, Reilly Smith had a really good game. That bumps up his trade value a little bit. But I want to discuss Evgeni Malkin. I thought this was one of his finest games of the year as well. His skating was off the charts. It looked like 2016 level skating, I feel like, from Evgeni Malkin. You can even go back a few more years as well. I thought he took command on the ice. This was a vintage Gino game. I think he was making plays with the puck on his stick every time he was out there, setting up chances. Even though some of his chances that he set up didn't go into the net, he was still setting up quality chances every time he was out there. It was a really nice game from him overall. And that's now 2 games in a row where I feel like he's starting to find his game a little bit more. I think he's definitely beating some of those washed allegations that I think we've seen on social media and a bunch of other forums as well. He can still play at a high level, people. Has he lost a step? Absolutely. I mean, he's 37 years old. He's not going to play the way he used to when he was 24 or even 28, but he is still a very good player in this league. He can still be a second line center, but it's as we've been talking about, he's got to get a little bit of help. He's been creating chances on most nights. The puck has just not been going into the net when he creates those chances. But you saw what happened when he did create some chances and score on a chance of his own. Boom. That's what happens sometimes. So I liked his game quite a bit in this one.
I did as well, and I got to give a shout out to the Columbus Blue Jackets broadcast because that's how I was forced to tune into the game last night. And they brought up a good point. One of his first shifts, he goes out and he gets tripped up by a Columbus Blue Jackets defenseman. It launches him into the boards. He stayed down for a little bit. He started barking about a call. And as much as I don't like seeing Gino bark about a call, because that means we're entering into the coin flip of what version of Gino are we going to get tonight? Are we going to get unhinged Gino that takes stupid penalties? Or are we going to get the Russian bear, Evgeni Malkin, who comes out and takes over? And the Columbus Blue Jackets broadcast acknowledged that. The guy said, he was like, oh, this is a dangerous game the Blue Jackets are playing right now, because when Evgeni Malkin gets upset, he is one of the few players who can come out and take over a game. Sure enough, to his next shift, he comes out, he steals the puck, he gets a scoring chance, and the broadcaster said the exact same thing. He just said, well, I think we know what version of Malkin we're going to be getting tonight, so this could be trouble for the Blue Jackets. And sure enough, it was. You already said vintage Gino performance and looked like a vintage Gino performance. That's what his goal was, man. When Evgeni Malkin was in his absolute prime, when he would wind up for a slap shot, it was going to have one of 3 things was going to happen. 1, the most productive thing, he was going to score. 2, in the least productive thing, he was going to miss the net and it would be a clearing attempt for the other team. Or 3, he might actually kill a goaltender with how hard he shoots the puck. Like, it would fire them into the back of the net, Mighty Ducks style. But that game from him last night, and then it also is frustrating because you saw the way him and Smith played together last night. And you saw the way him and Smith played to start the season. And you just sit there scratching your head thinking, where did this go? What happened to this? Why could they not do this consistently all season long?
It's baffling. It really is. Like, you saw that connection come back in this one, and it's just like, wow, if that connection had been there in December, January, or even February, where would this team be right now in terms of the standings? And you're right about that slap shot goal. All I could think about was how it was that total screw you goal. I'm not going to use the bad language on the show, but it reminded me of what he did in 2008 against the Flyers when he winded up, and you know what happened. He scored on that slap shot from about 10 feet away. And
if that slap shot would have hit Marty Biron in 2008, Marty Biron would not be on TV right now. He'd be dead.
I think that would have scarred him for quite a while. But so it's always nice seeing Gino line up a clapper like that. And you mentioned Jesse Puljujarvi as well. By the way, nice keep at the line by Ryan Graves. That was a nice pass by him. One of his best plays of the season so far as well. And Puljujarvi just let that thing rip. It's funny. maybe you shouldn't scratch Jesse Puljujarvi for quite a few games in a row when you need more depth scoring from the bottom half of your lineup. I understand if you want to do it for a game or two just because he's coming back from double hip surgery. I know it's really major, but doing it for multiple games in a row when you have other players down there who aren't producing, it just didn't really make that much sense to me. Now he comes back in the lineup, gets his first goal as a Penguin. Hopefully he can carry that momentum into some more games here down the stretch. That was a really nice goal from him overall.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on the overall sentiment that he probably should not have been held out of the lineup as long as he was. He was looking fine enough when he first debuted with the Penguins. You know, it wasn't anything spectacular, but it wasn't like he was playing poorly. What I will push back on, though, is the depth scoring thing, because that has kind of been the story of Puljujarvi's career up to this point, is that he plays well enough, he does some positive things, but he doesn't score. So, you know, but obviously that's a counterfactual. We can't sit here and say, oh yeah, if they would have left him in, they'd have probably gotten 4 or 5 goals out of him if they left him in, because we have no way to prove that. But last night it was another strong game by him on the whole. He looked like he can be an effective depth piece next season, should they choose to keep him this offseason, because he's signed through next season. And I would like to see more of them down the stretch here. I would like to, depending on what Kyle Dubas does over the next 48-ish hours with the trade deadline looming, I would like to see him get a little bit more of an elevated role. I would like to see the Penguins kind of use these last 20 or so games as an audition for the guys that might or might not be around come next season. Obviously, we know the big four are going to be here, but I'd like to see Puljujarvi. I'd like to see Puustinen. If Bemstrom is still around, I'd like to see him. I would like to see Sam Poulin get a chance up at the big club, and just tell these guys, like, and tell Sullivan, because I think at this point they're going to keep, at the very least, they're going to keep him through the end of the year. You just tell him, like, listen, I know you have your ways. I know you like to set the lineup certain ways and deploy them certain ways, but let the kids play the rest of this year. Let's see what we got. Let's see if these guys are worth holding on to, if they're going to get a look going out of camp next year. So a lot of those guys that I want to see them play more down the stretch with this team, basically with a 1% chance to make the playoffs, because there's the very real chance if you move some guys out, you let the kids play, maybe you make the last month or so of the season interesting.
Right. And if they do move Reilly Smith over the next 48 hours, which I expect they will, and then you potentially also move Rickard Rakell in a separate deal, that's a little more unlikely, I think, at this time. But say you move both of those players, Pat, boom, Puljujarvi has a spot to play on Evgeni Malkin's line, see what he can do for the final 20 or so games. Or also, even if one of them gets moved, I still think there's a spot right there for Puljujarvi to see what he can do for the final 20, 22 games for his game overall heading into the offseason and then heading into next season as well. But I think that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, it's the topic that everyone wants to discuss right now. There's a very real chance that a trade could break while we are recording this show. So we are going to give you the latest on everything that's going on regarding Jake Guentzel. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA only available to U.S. customers in good standing, and Robinhood Financial LLC is a registered broker-dealer. And we can't forget about Sleeper. Regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, which is the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleepers, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. You can do this by yourself. You can do this with your friends. You can do this with your family. You can do this with basically anyone. And all you have to do is pick weather studs like Connor McDavid, Nathan McKinnon, Sidney Crosby will record more or less their stats, goals, assists, plus minus. You can throw goaltenders in there and do saves. And to win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Penguins fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So all these rumors are just swirling regarding Jake Guentzel. As I tease heading into this segment, this trade could break any second now, potentially while we are recording. But as we know right now, the Penguins are trying to get a deal done by tonight. That was reported by TSN's Darren Dreger on Tuesday. So far, as of 3:42 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, I'll give you all the exact time when we're recording this, no deal has been agreed to yet. There have been reports that the New York Rangers are involved in talks. The Vancouver Canucks are involved. And you know, when Vancouver is involved, Jim Rutherford is trying his very hardest to get his guy. That's how he was when he was in Pittsburgh. That's how he's been throughout his career as a GM or as an executive. I know he's working with Patrick Allvin, but Jim is definitely working this behind the scenes as well. There were rumors that they were trying to maybe send Elias Lindholm to Boston to facilitate this. When Jim wants someone, he will do anything in his power to get it, Pat. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it. So those are a couple teams that are involved. The Oilers were involved, but I don't think they're going to be as much involved anymore. They traded for Adam Henrique. They gave up a first to get him, which, in my opinion, I think that's a little bit of an overpayment. But hey, they're going for a Stanley Cup, so whatever. But still, nothing has happened just yet. What do you make of everything that's going on with the Guentzel situation?
Well, the thing that encouraged me from Dreger's report yesterday, and this is obviously going to be outdated now just because of all the flurry of activity we've seen on Wednesday afternoon in the trade market, is that I liked the thought of getting Guentzel dealt before Friday, just because that would have given Kyle the opportunity to set the market. If he can get a decent haul for Jake Guentzel, that's going to leave a bunch of other contending teams scrambling to get whatever they believe to be the second place trophy. And that's going to drive prices through the roof. But now, as we've seen, a bunch of teams have made moves this afternoon with a lot of contenders, like Florida getting Tarasenko, the Oilers getting Adam Henrique, the Colorado Avalanche making their Bowen Byram trade, which was just, I couldn't believe that one. But, you know, at this point, I think the hope has to be, if you're Kyle Dubas and the Penguins, that Jim Rutherford is going to go full Jim Rutherford, because he will empty the tank to make a trade. He will put a sweetener in. He will pay a little more than you might expect to get a guy that he wants. And he has obvious history with Jake Guentzel. So does Rick Tocchet. There are a lot of ex-Penguins on the Vancouver Canucks right now and in the organization, not just Rutherford and Allvin. There's also Sergei Gonchar and, like I said, Rick Tocchet. So there is a lot of familiarity there for Jake Guentzel. You add in the fact that a lot of teams right now probably can't afford what Kyle Dubas wants for Jake Guentzel. The Vancouver Canucks can, and they have most of their key pieces locked up. They're not too worried about spending a lot of things right now because they're far ahead of schedule than where they're supposed to be. People forget they weren't supposed to be this good this year. They weren't going to be bad. They weren't going to be a lottery team. They looked like they were probably going to be a playoff bubble team, maybe make it in, maybe surprise some people, but they weren't supposed to be this good. So they're far ahead of schedule. And similar to what you hinted at with the Henrique trade, and we know this as Penguins fans, who gives a damn what you trade away if you can win a Stanley Cup? That flag flies forever. You're not sitting there looking at the 2017 Stanley Cup banner and going, oh man, I really missed that first round pick though. That'd have been nice to have. So if you're Kyle Dubas, you got to sweet talk Jim Rutherford here and say, like, listen, you need a very, very elite scoring winger. I have one. Pay up.
And with how Jim has always wanted to do quote unquote fair trades when he makes trades, I think the Penguins would come out of that deal with Vancouver better than if they were to trade with other teams. I know the Rangers have been poking around there as well. I know he's inside the division and it would hurt seeing him play with the Rangers just because the Rangers are one of the Penguins' biggest rivals. But if you can still get a pretty good package from them, that's maybe even better than a lot of other teams, maybe even better than Vancouver if you can swing it. I would still do that deal, even though you're trading him to a Metro Division rival. Though I also think the price should be a little higher if you're trading him to a rival. But that's just my opinion and how I see that. And
you definitely have to
go ahead.
Include a divisional tax if you
Agreed.
send him to, say, the Rangers or the Hurricanes, a team like that. You have to add in a divisional tax where you basically have to tell them, like, listen, we'll make the deal with you, but you got to make it sweeter because we're in the same division. We're not going to just hand them to you. I also think there's another thing, and I'm sorry to interrupt you here. I thought of this here just a second ago. Dubas and Rutherford have a lot of history making deals together. It might not be as widely known as I think, but when Jim Rutherford swung the deal to bring Phil Kessel to Pittsburgh, the lead negotiator from Toronto wasn't Lou. It was Dubas. Dubas helped orchestrate that deal with the Pittsburgh Penguins to get Phil Kessel. So these guys have worked together on extensive trades before. The relationship is there, and by all accounts, Jim Rutherford has a lot of respect for Kyle Dubas and thinks he's one of the good young general managers up and coming in the league. So you can really leverage that kind of relationship, because we know, as much as we complain about it as hockey fans, the NHL is an old boys club. And if one of the old boys likes your general manager, they'll help you out.
It's always been an old boys club, and it'll stay that way for probably quite some time. This might be a little bit of copium, but the thought did occur to me today, just because he hasn't been moved as of yet. But again, this could change at any time. Perhaps maybe when you're listening to this idea that I have could be thrown completely out the window, and this is probably a low % chance of even happening. But could Kyle Dubas say this is, again, 1 to 5% chance here? If he doesn't get what he's looking for, and obviously that's quite a bit for the best rental on the market, could he in fact keep him past the deadline and have him play the final 2022 games and see what you can do with perhaps extending him? I know there's been, I guess, if you want to call them rumors, that maybe he doesn't want to sign with the Penguins no matter what. I haven't seen that reported by verified people. I think they're just rumors that have been circulating overall. But is there a possibility that a few teams here don't want to pay what Kyle Dubas is asking, and Dubas is like, okay, if you're not going to give me what I want, I'm just going to keep him for the rest of the season and try and make a run at extending him, or signing him, before he becomes a free agent on July 1. Again, that might be just pure copium on my part. It's probably a low % chance of happening at this point, but I feel like it's at least a little bit of an option, even though it's still 4:00 on Wednesday afternoon.
I think that would be a failure by Kyle Dubas if that happens, because it's your only real leverage right now. Yeah, we've talked about Reilly Smith. We've talked about possibly Rickard Rakell. We've talked about Lars Eller, a couple other guys that you could move out and get some pieces for. But the guy that is going to get you the most return is Jake Guentzel. Now, I will say this, and again, I think this goes into similar territory that you were talking about. By all accounts, he's a rental. He is not going to go to Vancouver or whomever he ends up with and signing an extension in 2 weeks. I also think a lot of people kind of have forgotten, with everything that's happened so far this season, Jake Guentzel's camp basically said without saying they weren't going to negotiate any sort of extension in season. They were going to wait till the offseason. They weren't going. They never blatantly said, no, we're not talking contract. Jake's focused on the season, anything like that. But you could see with the language that they used when he got asked about contract and extension and where he's going to go, they pretty much said without saying, yeah, we're waiting till the offseason to do that. So I do think at the same time, there is a very real world where they could maybe get a haul for him, and maybe they don't re-sign him on July 1 and he doesn't sign an extension with whoever he ends up with, but they can throw their hat in the ring. They can make an offer and they can say, hey, you got your preferred center here. You're comfortable here. You've won Stanley Cups here. You're a fan favorite. Maybe you can come on back. But I do think at the end of the day, this all ends with Jake Guentzel not being a Penguin.
I agree. And I think to your idea that you just mentioned, Pat, that's a low percentage chance of happening. It's really rare when a team trades a rental to another team and then that player comes back to the original team when July 1 starts. The only one that I can really think of off the top of my head right now is Antoine Vermette. That was several years ago.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen very often. 98, 99% of the time, when you trade a player that's this or any rental, that player will sign with a different team on July 1 and not the original team. So I think fans just have to be aware of that. If Guentzel is a free agent heading into July 1, he's still probably not going to come back to Pittsburgh. And in a way, like, yes, he will have Sidney Crosby for at least a few years of his contract, but does he really want to commit 7 to 8 years to the Penguins where at the end of that contract, they're going to be in a full-scale rebuild? I mean, if I were him, probably not. Even though I know I would be able to get to play with Sidney Crosby for the first, 2, 3, maybe 4 years of that deal. On the back half of that, I'm going to be on a rebuilding team. I'd rather go to a contender for 7 years where I can contend for most years often than not. I guess that's what I'm kind of trying to hint at overall.
And overall, when you see the whole guy gets traded at the deadline as a rental and goes back to his former team, it happens more frequently than people say it does, but it happens with bottom 6 players. It happens with bottom pairing defensemen. It's guys who get moved from a team they've been with for a while and they do the whole like, hey, you're a good soldier, go chase a Stanley Cup. And whether they get it or not, they come back on a cheap deal. We saw that with, can't think of the guy's name. The Penguins acquired him in 2014 from Toronto, but he did it 2 different times. He was a depth center. He got moved and then the Penguins got him at the deadline, and then he went back and signed with Toronto again. So I think it's unlikely, but at the end of the day, this is the first of a couple different can't miss moments for Kyle Dubas in his tenure as the president of hockey operations. Yeah, it sucks. It's painful. You don't want to move on from a guy who has been so productive, who has been an absolute loyal soldier and one of the best wingers in the franchise's history. But the moment you find yourself in and you find this franchise in, you have to move him.
It's something that we've been saying for the past couple weeks. You can't miss on this return. You can't lower your asking price just for the sake of it. You have to get a haul for this player. And speaking of, another trade just came through. Wenberg to the New York Rangers. So we'll have to see what the return is on that. I'm not really sure if that's going to take them out of the Jake Guentzel sweepstakes, but Wenberg has been traded to the New York Rangers. That's just breaking news on the Locked On Penguins episode for today, even though we don't cover the New York Rangers. But I think that'll do it for this second segment. Coming up to end the show, it's Wednesday. You all know what that means. Warrior Helmet Wednesday. Pat and I are going to give our Warrior Helmet to the player that was the best on the team over the past week. There's not too many selections considering how the team has played, but there's a pretty obvious one, and we're going to get into that to end the show. But before we discuss that, we got to tell you all about Indeed. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. If you are hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Indeed makes it easy to hire great talent. According to ComScore, Indeed is the #1 job site worldwide, and Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer valid through March 31st. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, you know it. It's time to give out our Warrior helmet for this week. This selection was pretty easy for us today, considering how he
Jeff Carter
on Tuesday night. I think if he didn't have this good of a game, it would have been a bit hard to select a player for this segment. But I'm going to give this over to you. Who gets the Warrior helmet for this week?
No, it's not actually Jeff Carter. I'm just being a goof. It's Evgeni Malkin. I mean, just put aside how this season has gone. Put aside where the Penguins are right now. I always think back to something our pal and my former co-host, Jesse Marshall, has said about this team for the last couple of seasons. Yes, it's frustrating as hell. Yes, they are not where we want them to be. And it looks like the end of this era is a whole heck of a lot closer than it once was. But a game like last night, there are only a handful of players in the National Hockey League that can have a game like that. Yes, I know it's the Columbus Blue Jackets. Yes, I know they're not that great. But when Evgeni Malkin is on his game, when Evgeni Malkin is playing that way, it is an absolute treat to watch. He was the best player on the ice by a mile. He had a great game. He scored that awesome goal, involved in every play, skating absolutely beautifully and hunting pucks, engaged in all three zones. And it was just, to make the meme that there is from Locked On Penguins, it was a vintage Evgeni Malkin performance.
It absolutely was in every aspect. And I like that you brought up, it's Columbus. I saw that take so often on social media last night. And it's like, who cares what team he's doing this against? You will be missing these types of performances from Evgeni Malkin when he's no longer playing and when his jersey is up in the rafters. So I don't really care what team it's against. And I saw a couple other people, I'm like, well, where has this been throughout the season? And while I get that to a degree, he's been playing mostly well throughout the season. He's shown flashes of playing at this level throughout the season. He's been setting up chances most nights. The puck has just not been going in the back of the net because no one has been able to finish off his chances. It's been like this all season long. So I just loved everything about that performance. He also gets my Warrior helmet for this week. And again, it kind of goes back to that game in Edmonton a little bit. Even though the Penguins were rotten in that game, I thought Gino was one of their better players. And, he gets the lone goal right around the net front area. Just a really nice couple of games overall from Gino. And again, hope he really keeps this up for the final 22 games of the season. He's starting to look more like the version that we saw in October, November, compared to the funk that we saw him be in a little bit, December, January. Again, he is still a fine second line center. I will take that to my grave. He just, again, needs a little bit of help on his line for the rest of the season, and then especially into next season.
Again, we said it in the first segment with the way he meshed with Smith last night and early in the season. We have seen it as long as he has somebody on his line that he can have ride shotgun with him, he's still very effective. So the importance continues to be heightened going into next season to make sure that we have somebody on the roster that can ride shotgun with Evgeni Malkin for 70, 75 games. We know injuries are going to happen. We know off nights are going to happen. But if you can get him a winger that can run with him for the majority of the season, there is still a lot of talent to be had with Evgeni Malkin.
100%. And just to end the show, the return for the Wenberg trade has come in second and a fourth overall for Wenberg. So the Rangers still have quite a few assets left if they want to make another deal. So they could still very much be involved in the Jake Guentzel sweepstakes right now. But I think that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Listen to this while you can, because a lot of the show honestly might be mute by the time tonight rolls around. But thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this episode. Whenever a Guentzel deal breaks, Pat and I will be on for an emergency recap of the deal, giving our initial thoughts before breaking it down in full for the next full episode of this podcast. But again, thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We'll be back potentially on Wednesday night, but if we're not back on Wednesday night, definitely on Thursday.